Hello, hello, hello. Cough, 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 cough. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Cleveland React Meetup group. So before we get started, I just a few kind of like announcement stuff. So we want to make sure that we thank our sponsors. So the location that you are currently in is thanks to University Tees. So yay, clap, clap, clap. And the repeating food sponsor is Sprockets. So thank you, Dan, and thank you, Sprockets, for the food. I don't know, this is really awkward to do. I don't think we've done any like intros and stuff like that, and I don't think we need to necessarily start that right now, but is there anything cool that's coming up that anybody is really excited about, or any events or anything in the Cool, thanks. All right, so just a reminder, we said this last time, which is why we have Keith here, thank you, but we are looking for more speakers and more topics and more help. So if you have something in the back of your brain that you might want to talk about to the group, or even if you just want to throw out an idea and see if there might be some interest there, we're very interested in hearing that. So please think about it, because it's going to take a lot of content to get us through one per month. So cool. So thank you again, Keith. Keith is going to be talking to you shortly. I'm going to repeat the bio that he put on the Meetup page, just in case you skimmed it. I did it and didn't actually read it until right now. So Keith is a mobile developer at Nudge. He specializes in building their next generation of wellness engagement apps using React Native. He loves all things mobile except screen notches and manufacturer-specific Android bugs. When he's not slinging JavaScript, you might find Keith zipping through busy Cleveland streets on a bicycle, building a computer kits out of Legos, or in the kitchen breaking new ground in the field of alternative omelet fillings. Or I don't know how to read. No, I think you're good. Either one. If you could file an omelet, that would be cool. And if you have really neat things to put in an omelet, also fun. So thank you. Everybody give a nice warm welcome to Keith.
Thanks. Uh-oh, my password. This is the one part where I can't hold the mic. There you go. I was like, I can do this whole thing while holding a mic, and then I forgot that computers lock sometimes. There we go. All right. So I'm going to talk to you about React Native and Expo, and native apps without the native pain. So that's a big theme of this is native apps are painful. I shouldn't have given that away. What am I doing? Here we go. So today's subject, we're going to talk about two things that are related but not exactly the same. React Native is a framework for writing native apps for phones in React, and Expo is a build system for React Native apps. We will discuss what that means more later. Just in case you need to leave because this presentation does not meet your needs, I'll tell you the reasons why you should not be using React Native. If you have to build some super crazy interface, and I was trying to think what this is, because actually I just spent my past year building a kind of crazy interface. I was thinking like maybe like you had to build like the Minority Report giant screen thing, or like a scroll view tilted 45 degrees on its side or something. Like you probably couldn't do that in React Native. You probably have to go to actual native for that. Device-specific APIs or sensors, you know, sometimes you just can't get that in React Native. High-performance gaming, you can actually write games in React Native, and they actually don't look half bad. So maybe that's not an issue. If you just want to stuff your web page into a mobile app, there's something for that. It's called Cordova, Ionic, whatever. You don't want React Native. If you're Airbnb, you don't want React Native. Anybody hear about that? Yeah, go Google it. And if you're hoping to avoid issues with screen notches, my least favorite thing in the world. In general, if you're hoping to avoid the issues that native phones have because of the native SDK, like the fact that Android is just 15 to 20% buggier than iOS for whatever reason, you're going closer to the native OS. You're actually going to have more native problems than a web view. I mean, that's possible in React Native, but if you're at that point, you want to just use Cordova because Cordova has a phone storage API, and actually React Native's web view is buggier than Cordova's. So, oh yes, I hate notches. But if you've gotten past that point and you still are interested, React Native has a pretty unique value proposition. You can write native mobile apps in JavaScript and React. These apps feel like native apps, not like a web page, because they use real native iOS and Android UI components. You can share 95% of your code between iOS and Android, while still these apps look like, it doesn't look like a crappy iOS app shoved into Android or vice versa. They look good on both platforms. And you can build most of your apps without ever touching Android Studio or Xcode, which are the bane of every mobile developer's experience. And finally, you can update your JavaScript in your apps over the air without resubmitting the App Store. This is also the holy grail of app development, is being able to completely avoid Apple's approval process. So good stuff ahead. I think it's interesting. I did a presentation like a couple years ago called React Native is for Switchers, because I felt like I actually encountered React Native in a complete switch of my career. I was a full stack C# dev 2.5 years ago, and 5 years ago, I hated JavaScript with a passion. And now all I do, I don't even have Windows. I just write JavaScript all day. And yeah. So it's a really great platform for web developers who are looking to take their existing skills and make the jump to mobile. It's great for web development teams who suddenly need an app and worried they don't have the expertise. It's for teams that have done the Cordova route and just found that doesn't really meet their needs. For small teams that don't have the resources to have an entire Android and iOS development team, and teams that want to start sharing code between web and mobile. And all these little things kind of identified with us. I was making a career transition, and my company Nudge, we were finding all these things. We had like one person to maintain a mobile app. We're not going to write native code. So, question: How many folks have done native iOS or Android development here? Anybody? All right, not that many. So originally when I did this presentation at CodeMash, that's okay. When I did this presentation at CodeMash, or a variant of it, I was targeting native developers and talking about why native development sucks. I used to be a hobbyist iOS developer, and native development sucked. So we could skip this part, or even though most of you aren't mobile developers, we could just laugh at and pity what mobile developers have to go through. What do you guys think? Should we laugh at them, or should we skip it? All right. So if 75% of these jokes go over your head, just grin and nod and know that whatever real pain is behind those jokes is truly real pain and painful. So top 10 reasons why native development sucks. Number 10, most of iOS development is writing controllers with at least 47 different delegate methods, all of which have names like table view, self-heroic, index path with a side of mayo and pickles, and why would this method name end? Just stop it already, yada yada. Completion handler. Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. The most important iOS development resource is a website called fudgingclosuresyntax.com, except it doesn't say fudge. Android has its own code smells like the factory to create a locator, to create a factory to generate a locator, to find a singleton, to start a listener that takes an anonymous inner class pattern. You're supposed to, even though you're gonna get it. No, it's kidding. You might get this one. A 16-core Xeon processor and an NVIDIA GTX 11 billion whatever graphics card is required to run a Google Pixel emulator at 5 frames per second. That is not an exaggeration. Speaking of hardware problems, native iOS development requires a Mac. Macs don't even ship with working keyboards anymore. And what is Xcode doing with my microphone? Is it analyzing how often developers swear at Xcode? Is Apple collecting data to make Siri better at cursing? What's the deal with that? If 20 developers open Android Studio and write Hello World, 19 of them will have Gradle sync errors, and they will be 18 different Gradle sync errors. Apple and Google are required by law. Why did I do that? Apple and Google are required by law to make app certificate generation as complicated as possible and must delay reporting of any cert-related errors until your release build has been running for at least 20 minutes. Funny context behind that one. So back when I wrote that at the beginning of the year, I thought that iOS builds took 20 minutes. I didn't realize they only took 20 minutes because I have a 8-year-old laptop. I got a new one just the other day, and now they take 4. So shame on me. And what's the deal with each part of the reverse URL being a folder? There's nothing in there. I don't get it. Android developers explain that to me. That makes no sense. That's just wasted folders. Finally, the number one reason is to prevent global warming. Because using Xcode and Android Studio is a leading cause of global warming. So switch to React Native, save the planet. Everybody who's used React actually knows that the little, Metro bundler thing or whatever you call that, the little bundler guy is actually using a ton of your CPU. So this probably isn't true, but that's okay. So let's talk about React Native, the part of this. So what is React Native? It's React and it's native. So what do I mean by that? It's React. It looks like React. You've got a component, and you've got state, and you've got props. The only real difference here is instead of having divs and spans and all those sorts of things, you have scroll view, text view. You have these placeholders for native components instead of using HTML, because you're not writing HTML, you're actually writing native UIs. Before I go any further though, since this is a React Native meetup, I should clarify, no, it's really React. It actually supports modern React. I actually went through, in preparation for that, I didn't just recycle an old presentation, I actually went when hooks came out, I was like, it's okay. I mean, I like hooks, but what I really want you to do, since I'm a React Native developer, is fix all the Android bugs. But I actually went and rewrote it in hooks. Hooks now work in React Native, so you can do modern React now. Second, it's native. So this is how React Native fundamentally works. So you've got your JavaScript, and this is being bundled all the time, and when you're debugging your app or whatever. And then you've got the React Native JavaScript library, and the JavaScript library has all these things you import, like views and text inputs and buttons and section lists. And these are generic platform agnostic versions of these things, and they have the same API roughly for Android and iOS. And then you have the bridge. This is the magic portal that sends your JavaScript commands over to the native side. And the bridge decomposes this into native Objective-C and Java or whatever commands that will then manipulate the native equivalents. So if you're using a view, it's actually to be making changes on a UI view in iOS. And it's going to be making changes on a Android view, or if it's a list of items, a UI table view versus a recycler view. So it's actually turning your JavaScript into actions in the native SDK, which is why it's native. It's not HTML. It's actually affecting the screen just like an actual, like a pure native app, as we would call it, view. So if you're familiar, has anybody done Cordova or Ionic in here? All right, so if you're familiar with the way a project looks in Cordova, you'll be roughly familiar with the traditional React Native project, which would be you have a bucket of JavaScript, and you have an Android project and an iOS project, and these are the equivalent. These are things that would open in Android Studio or Xcode, and they just have special stuff in there that runs your JavaScript and mounts it to the screen. So it works roughly the same way. As you got a bunch of JavaScript, and you've got iOS and Android projects that can run that JavaScript and send them over the bridge, and that's your whole app. And then, of course, traditionally, if you have these things, then you would have to compile an Android app. You'd have to compile an iOS app. You have to send it to Apple, all that stuff. So with that in mind, let's move on to Expo. So remember, Expo is a build system for React Native apps. If you want React Native, if you want to start coding React Native tonight or whatever, you really want to go look for Expo. So this gives you a command line interface that lets you create these special React Native Expo projects. And it serves your JavaScript over the web, and you have this Expo app on your phone that can run it. It's like a browser for apps. Basically, it's like they just stuck all the native React Native bits in there, and you call out to your little URL that's serving your JavaScript, and then it runs it. Apple's actually okay with this, remarkably. I'm a little bit surprised. So really though, I just said you want Expo instead. You really don't even need to like try anymore to find Expo. Like maybe like 2 years ago, if you searched React Native, you would end up in the wrong spot. If you go to React Native's website now, they just tell you to use Expo. So just search React Native. If you forget what Expo means, that's fine. So getting started, you probably already have Node because you're in the React Meetup, whatever. You're going to install this Expo app on your phone. Just search Expo on your store. You're going to run some commands to start a new project. You're going to install the Expo CLI, which is the only global dependency you need. You're going to init a project, and you're going to start your project. And from there, it actually prompts you for how to run this app on your phone. So we're going to do that right now because that's hard to visualize because it's that magical. Well, that's cheating. Let me clear this here. Start it from the start. Prove that it actually works. It's not smoke and mirrors. All right, so I already created my Expo project here. I ran those first few commands. I'm going to run start now. And wait, just so I have my steady state here. I have my phone with my Expo app on here. If I open this app, you'll see it's got just kind of a thing that says, hey, I'm waiting for stuff. So I'm going to run Expo. Actually, let's just put these both side by side here. If I can. Oh, that's too hard. There we go. All right. So I'm going to run Expo start here. And it is going to start Metro Bundler, which is like the React Native equivalent of like Webpack, I guess you'd say. It's just turning your JavaScript, your fancy ES6, ES 2017, whatever, turning it into minified JavaScript it can send over the air. And it's going to give me this QR code. So if I'm on Android, I can actually scan this QR code with the Expo app. In fact, what the hey, I might as well do that. I tried to share my Android phone on the screen and the Wi-Fi wasn't having it, but you guys can probably see from here. So I've got my Expo app on here. Looks kind of the same. You probably can't see that. Your camera. I'm going to hit scan QR code. Now I've got my little camera on here. You might be able to see that. Sorry, camera, you probably can't see. And then I'm going to scan that QR code. And, oh, it just said it can't load it. I think I have a network error going on. That's okay though. So Expo has a blue screen of death, but this will work a lot better on my simulator right here. So pretend I scanned it. And now we're over my simulator now. This has a little shortcut if you have an iOS simulator, which you don't need for Expo, I should add. You can just hit I, and it'll actually automatically open it in the simulator. And now you see it's building my JavaScript bundle. Slowly, because it's an old computer. You can do it, buddy. Sure. Oh, it's like a local host or just a local, like as if you were serving how you can like serve like a React Webpack app. You can just kind of serve it as a local HTTP kind of thing, usually on a different port, like 8080 or whatever. It's kind of the same thing where it's serving it, I think, over 19,000. So it's serving it over HTTP, and the Expo app is reading that URL. One kind of nice thing too, you don't really see here, but you have an Expo account you sign into, and when I sign into it on my phone and on my command line, it'll automatically pop up as soon as I'm serving some Expo anywhere. It'll automatically pop up and say, hey, you want to run this? And you can just tap on it and run it. So now you can see my app is serving here. And if I changed code, I would, I don't know if I want to change anything, I'll break something, but here, I'll just hit enter. That's innocuous, right? No, I won't. That's dangerous. I'm just hit save. See, it reloaded. You had to look really quick. I'm sorry. I'll show you changing code later. I will change some. Here, let me change that stupid sign-in button. There we go. Oh man, I wrote too much code here. There's too many libraries there. So I'm that guy. So here's my project. I'm that, like, there was a debate on Twitter like a few weeks ago among like the React Illuminati, and they were all like complaining about the guy who like makes all like the index things and has like all the layers. And I gotta confess, I'm that guy. I'm sorry. I really like my structure, and I like my little index file saying exactly what comes out. And it's a big problem. I'm sure my coworkers hate me because of it. Here we go. Sign in, dude. There we go. Oh, that's that typing with one hand. There you go. Boom. There we go. Sign in, dude. I proved it. It works. All right. Yes. Thank you for the clapping. So I wanted to point out a few things before I came back from the to the boring PowerPoint part. So this is a React Native Expo project. I've got, just by my convention, I got all my JavaScript sitting in this giant folder here. You kind of traditionally have this app.js entry point where whatever gets exported from app.js becomes like your whole app. So I have a little thing going on. It's my kind of my throwback to iOS, where I always call like my view stuff my storyboard. So that's why you just see storyboards in the middle there. It's like my whole navigation hierarchy. I just like to remember my roots, you know. A key thing when you have an Expo project is this app.json. So this is a file that's required by Expo itself, and it defines like the special sauce parameters. It's like what makes your app unique in Expo's eyes. So the slug is like a unique app identifier, which I'll get into in a second. You can say what platforms does it work on. You can specify icons when you actually go to compile an app. You can specify, this is its bundle identifier in iOS. This is the version numbers. So that's really all you need for it to be an Expo app, in addition to having just like the basic imports, like it's got to have Expo in it, and React Native. Yeah, that's the three things: Expo, React Native, and React. And if you have those dependencies, you have an Expo app. And then because of that, and because we're running through Expo, you don't actually need the iOS and Android folders to run your JavaScript or run your app, because if you have the Expo client, you don't have to compile anything. It's just running JavaScript. Moving on to, where did I leave off? Here we go. Oh, yes. So I mentioned, because you never need to compile iOS apps, you never need Xcode, which means you don't actually need a Mac. And I finally proved it the other day. It was a little bit fiddly, but my wife got a new Chromebook, and I was like, I just have to see if I can write mobile apps in a Chromebook. And yes, it is possible. So the logical conclusion to this, I'm talking about, an app on your phone that can run any React Native JavaScript and not needing to compile stuff. And the logical conclusion of this is basically like CodePen for mobile, which is snack.expo.io. A fun little parlor trick I always used to do is like open Safari on my phone, open a snack, write some code in mobile Safari, and then go over to the Expo app and run it. Like you can write an app on your phone and run it on your phone. I mean, besides that, though, it's actually useful for a lot of things, demos, of course. And then if you find a bug in React Native, which if you work in React Native for a week, you're going to find a bug. Sorry. It's not to version 1.0 yet. Library maintainers are a lot happier if you provide a snack. And that's like way easier than providing like a whole repo. You can just be like, I can code this repro case like on one page in my web browser. So it's a pretty cool thing. I recommend everybody try it. I mean, in fact, if you just go on your computer and stop paying attention to me and just play with Snack the rest of the time, I'm perfectly happy with that. So what I've shown you so far, JavaScript going from your computer to your phone, I mean, that's an app, but that's not really an app, because apps have their own icon on your home screen, right? So how do you do this? So it's a two-step process. First, you're going to run Expo publish, and this is actually going to publish your minified production-ready JavaScript bundle to their AWS cloud. And then you're going to run Expo build iOS or Expo build Android. And what this does is it actually requests their build server farm to go build your app for you. It detects, your slug in your app.json matches, on the server or whatever, and on your client. So we're going to build an app that wraps around this JavaScript. Basically, they're going to build the Expo client, except it automatically points to your bundle. And they're going to give you a link and say, hey, wait 5-10 minutes, and we'll tell you when it's done, and then you can download it, and that is your finished APK or IPA file. and then you can upload that to Apple or Google. And in fact, one really cool thing to do is, if you've ever dealt with Apple, especially the certs are so weird. It's like a distribution cert, a provisioning profile, a push notification cert, all this weird crap. When you run Expo build for the first time, it asks you, would you like us to handle the complicated stuff for you? And you hit yes, and it gives you like a little keyback, and it just stores all your cert stuff up there, like nice and encrypted and whatever. And all you have to ever do is say, just keep using that. I mean, if you want to do all that stuff yourself, it gives you the option, but if you don't need to, please don't. Now at that point, so this is the one point where you would actually need Xcode, is you can't just upload an IPA file to the App Store. You actually have to use a command line tool that only works on a Mac that's provided by Apple, which is the stupidest thing ever. So if you're to this point and you didn't have a Mac still, there's like macincloud.com. You can rent like a Mac by the hour for a couple of dollars. Like, I mean, there's ways around this. You could borrow this. I'll probably sell this to you for $100 at the end of the thing. So just because I think a picture is worth, words or whatever they say. I was actually just going to run this for the heck of it. You actually don't need to run the publish if you're running the build. So I'm just going to say Expo build Android, and we'll just see it kick off here. And we'll see if we get an APK file by the end. It's going to do some grinding. We won't wait the whole time. That would be really boring if I just waited 5 or 10 minutes and you'd be like, I'm not going to continue the presentation until this build is done. Now it's building. It's pretty good at caching too. So if you built once already, like I've shipped app updates in like 30 seconds when it's cached, which actually brings me to what I should probably tell you about while I'm oh yeah, I'm skipping this part. That was just a note for me to skip that part. Here we go. I should present this while we're waiting for it to build. So the best part about this, so I've mentioned you've got JavaScript going to the cloud, then you're requesting the cloud build an app for you. It's basically building an app around a JavaScript bundle. So what's something that JavaScript's really good at? It's being downloaded. So by default, every Expo app has built into it the capability to check when the app starts, or even after the app starts, has the JavaScript bundle in the cloud updated? Is it newer than the JavaScript bundle I have right now? And if it is, it'll download it and update your app. So this is how you get around the App Store updates. Now you can't get around it infinitely. If you completely swap out your app, basically turn it from a chat app into some kind of Bitcoin mining hacking thing or something like that, Apple is probably not going to look at you very nice when they find out. But for shipping bug updates, the other reason you would have to use a store update is if you're updating your Expo version. If it's changing the version of React Native or the version of Expo, then you actually have to do a store update because that changes the binary stuff. But anything that just changes your JavaScript, you don't need to do the store anymore. I mean, we were doing store updates every 3 or 4 months, and I just shipped like 20 JavaScript updates in the meantime. And there was a bunch of bug fixes my clients used to never get because it would just be like, wow, I'm going to have to prepare for a giant update. No, I'm just going to push out JavaScript 30 seconds later. Everybody on their next reload of the app has my updated code. And believe it or not, Apple is still okay with this. There actually is a clause in there about downloading JavaScript and that being okay. It's like interpreted code versus compiled code. You can't update your binary in Apple on the fly, but you can update your JavaScript. Still, though, if you abuse it, they might, want to tiptoe down on them a little bit. Heading back to my little screen, though. This probably has actually gotten pretty, oh no, it didn't get far at all. So now it's building the Android bundle. So we'll come back to that and we'll see if we get an APK out at the end. Slow computer again, Let's see, oh, yes. So we are actually shipping an app with this exact workflow, our first React Native app we did. So my company Nudge, we do this healthcare engagement platform. We have a dashboard for coaches. The coaches give their clients an app. The clients can log health data into the app. And then they can also chat with their coaches. The coaches can see their data. So it's this big, happy, collaborative thing in between whatever your in-person coaching sessions are. So the one thing we didn't have when I started was a mobile version of the coach dashboard. So that was the first thing we built in React Native to kind of get our feet wet. And we built it with this workflow we describe right here. We never touched a native project. It's still using this workflow. And it's been going pretty great. So I won't dwell on this part too long because, most of you have probably seen some React, but I just wanted to describe kind of, some of the specific more like recipes for how to code a React Native app. And I have a project up here on this QR code, bit.ly/rn-keith-demo. I have my actual demo project up there, and you can actually run it yourself. But I wanted to kind of start at the high level. So I mentioned like my storyboard over here where I've got my navigation. So most navigation, especially if you're doing an Expo app, is going to be with a library called React Navigation, which is somewhere in there. And it should look a lot like if you're using, like React Router or whatever the preeminent router is for React. You're basically going to create different types of navigators. So you have like a stack navigator, which would be like, I'm showing one screen and then I'm showing another screen. So actually, I should probably come over to my demo here, sign in. So like stack navigation would be like, I'm on this one screen and then I push another screen over it and then I can go back again. So real simple, just here's one screen, here's another screen. If I want to push from one to the other, I say, hey, push chat over main tabs. Then we have like tab navigators. So tab navigators are more like, hey, I actually have 3 screens at once over here. I have my inbox, my cool stuff, and my settings. I can put those in a tab arrangement. They can be bottom tabs, they can be top tabs. But I'm just saying, hey, these are 3 screens at once, and I can switch between them with tabs. If you really need to, you can completely swap out these UI elements too to change the way your tabs look with React Navigation. That's basically how navigation works. So my next recipe for you, this is kind of getting now into my halfway between my storyboard and my components. So storyboard is where I use, has anybody heard of like container pattern for React? I might be naming it wrong. The big idea though is that you have a component that just, the only job of it is to glue your data to your UI. So I take that a little further where I call them screens in React Native because I feel like I tried once where I had one component for gluing my data to the UI and then another component on top of that for gluing my navigation to my data to my UI. It looked terrible. So I just do stuff like this. I just say, hey, if I have an inbox screen, this is where I am going to call my data. If I got an API, I'm going to call it here. Actually, in reality, I'm probably using some kind of state library. I like Mobic State Tree. Other people like Redux, but for the sake of an example, I'm not going to show you that because this is not a Redux talk. I wouldn't even know how to talk to you about Redux. So in this case, I've got like a refresh where I am getting my inbox items. I'm setting a loading flag, and then all I'm doing is saying, hey, this is full screen, and everything else is farmed out to a higher level component I call inbox, which just takes my data and tries to do as little massaging of that as possible. And then I can go down to, in my components, where I have an inbox component that only deals with how do I render an inbox. So where I was kind of going with those, so I got my container pattern, just trying to keep my components dumb. I think I already went through that, so I will not bother with that there. My recipe 3, this is probably more relevant if you've coded React, but you haven't coded React Native. The secret with mobile, and actually probably get this if you write mobile web apps as well, is everything's a list in mobile. Even if you have a display on your screen that looks like it's not scrollable or whatever, or looks like every element is different. When we think of lists, we usually think of repeating things. Even if nothing's repeating, you probably still want to make it a list because our phones are narrow and tall. Sony just came out with a 21:9 phone, like it goes up. It's like insane. I think it breaks in my apps, by the way. I'm really mad about that. So you want to think of things in verticality. So it's really, really, really common to use something like the section list or scroll view or flat list. And these are all just variations on the basic list pattern. Section list, you can guess, has sections, like you can see my little sections over here, new items and not so new items. Flat list would just not have the sections. Scroll view would just scroll anything. And what's kind of nice is these wire up in an efficient way. They probably don't need to be that efficient anymore because our phones have like more RAM than our computers. But back in the day when phones had like 128 megs of RAM, it was really important if you had a long scrolling list to not load 50 billion items at once. So things like section list and flat list actually map to the native UI table view in iOS, the recycler view in Android, where they're really smart about unmounting list items from memory when you scroll down. So you're only maybe rendering like, 15, 10, whatever. So that's why you see syntax like this, like render item. We don't just stuff a bunch of items and do a map or something like that, or a for loop. So then, of course, after that, everybody's familiar with this is the prime, selling point of React, is they're just so good at componentizing stuff, and that's just what we keep doing here. And the special sauce, the only special sauce that React Native has to add to this is it doesn't have CSS because we're native, we're mobile, we're not in HTML, but it has something that really looks like CSS. It's basically CSS, and the only way you can arrange anything is with Flexbox. So that's what you end up with here. This is a bit of a wall of code, but this is the idea here is my component is on the left, and then I actually show you my styles. And the cool thing is since you don't have CSS, you don't have CSS files, and you actually create all of your CSS in JavaScript, which of course is an option in React, but it's the only way in React Native. So everything is a JavaScript object, which means you can do fun JavaScript object stuff. And you can see, in the case here where I've got my base cell and everything's, justified contents, flex start, I've got going left to right here horizontally, and then I've got like a vertical thing going over to here. So works pretty similar. I mean, there's some exceptions to the rule, but the Flexbox generally works pretty similar to web Flexbox. Another great thing is it's really, I mentioned code sharing. It's really easy to share most of your code and then just break out in that one little bit you need to look one way on iOS and that one little bit you need to look on Android. And you have the platform component from React Native, and that just lets you write code like platform.os equals iOS, and you can change stuff around like that. If you just want to change one little thing in the file, you notice probably in switching between the platforms, you notice, man, this looks really good with a padding of 4 on iOS, and it looks really good with a padding of 8 on Android, that kind of thing. And then, look, I just covered it, but the other cool thing you can do if you're like, this particular file it needs to have a completely different implementation on iOS and Android. You can actually use .ios.js and .android.js file extensions to split between the two. And now you can also do .web.js. I haven't tried this yet. Well, I tried it and my app completely reversed in a million flames. But you can actually now compile Expo apps into web code as well. So you can serve the same thing on Android, iOS, and web. It's actually using a library called React Native Web, which does a pretty good job of translating, like if I have a view, it's going to turn it into a div and do these different things. If I have a native button, it's going to turn it into a HTML button, all these different things. And anything that isn't supported at all, like, I don't know, like camera or whatever, it just won't do that part. So pretty cool thing there. So just to refresh where we've been so far, we've got React Native, where we've got a framework for writing JavaScript and React. They look like native apps because they are. We've got Expo, this build system that keeps this out of native projects and lets us update OTA. It's got to be a catch, right? I mean, I thought it was too good to be true. Maybe you guys are like, yeah, it's pretty lame. But for the first 6 months of my job, I thought I was cheating at life. I'm like, I have this job, and when I have to upgrade a library, it takes me a whole whopping hour, and I never have to touch these awful things that slow my computer down. So what's the catch? Okay. So in an Expo project, since I'm not compiling an app in my debug cycle, and even when I'm compiling an app, over the cloud service, I don't really have control over that. That means I can only write custom JavaScript. But as we saw before, React Native apps aren't just JavaScript. They're JavaScript and Objective-C. They're JavaScript and Java. There's a huge native piece. If you were to split up the file size between the two, if you're generating a 30 megabyte Android binary, maybe 3 megs would be JavaScript if your app was pretty complex, and 27 megs would be native stuff. In Expo, you don't get to customize that 27 megs. So that means that if it works a certain way because of the native code that the React Native team or the Expo team wrote, that's the way it works. You can't include additional libraries that add additional native capabilities. And of course, this is just speaking to, this would be impossible to offer the kind of convenience that Expo is offering and trying to do this. The App Store would shut them down, or their build process in the cloud would be so ridiculously complex. Like, it was just, anybody who's tried to add any native code to a native project ever, it always fails the first 75 times. So just imagine that happening at scale for all these people requesting their apps being built by Expo in the cloud. And to kind of put a picture on this, so I'm talking about natively linked libraries and JavaScript libraries. So an example of a JavaScript library, and by JavaScript library, it's only JavaScript. It works completely within the boundaries of the React Native SDK or library. This surprises people, but React Native navigation, so all this crazy stuff here where it's putting views on and stuff like that and switching over to tabs. If you've ever worked in a native project before, that's like one of the first things you lay down in like Android Studio or Xcode is like those native tab controllers, those native stack views. But React navigation actually is a completely JavaScript only library. It's actually faking navigation entirely. It's just redrawing your views really creatively and applying cool animations to make it look like actual iOS or Android navigation. So as such, because it's doing that, that means that you can install React navigation. All you have to do is, yarn add, npm install, and it works with React Native with no additional issues, because it's only using views and texts and images and animation, and those are all mapping the things that are already inside the binary, the Objective-C, the Java code that React Native is providing. On the other hand, take a simple thing, relatively simple, a library called React Native Blur. So you ever see those like frosted glass effects on iOS that were all the rage around iOS 7? Like everybody made like a really cool weather app where you scrolled down, the glass got less and more frosty. Maybe I only remember that. But so a simple thing like that, frosted glass, that actually has a native dependency that's not in base React Native. If you npm install React Native Blur, this blur view that it requires is not automatically in your native code. So when the JavaScript side calls out to that, it just says, I can't find this. Your app is going to crash. The only way it goes in there is if you have a plain vanilla React Native project where you can actually add native code. You actually have to link these files into the Objective-C, and then blur view starts to work. So Expo's solution for 98% of you is to just include everything. So if you were just using React Native on your own, you would have the base React Native library, and you'd be able to put views on the screen and text and not a lot of other things. But Expo says, hey, we're just going to give you all these extra libraries. We're going to put the camera manipulation stuff in there. We're going to put the blur view in there. And so when you run it in the Expo client and when you compile it with the Expo service, you don't have to worry about adding that native code. It's already there. So when you write JavaScript for it, it already works. And they include really just about everything. You got SVG, you've got OpenGL, you got camera, you got push notifications, you've got pedometers, photo rolls, you got ARKit. You can write AR apps in Expo. Sometimes it still isn't enough. So this is the case. Our first React Native app, we could just use the Expo happy path. Our next one was to replace our client-facing health tracking app, which used Apple Health to sync a lot of your health data. Apple Health is not part of Expo's native code. You have to have native code running. You have to call native Apple SDKs to use HealthKit, and React Native doesn't expose that. And that's not Expo. So what do we do? So when I say Expo, there's actually 3 different workflows. The first one we described is the managed workflow. That's the happy path where you never have to touch Xcode and Android Studio. The second one that came out around the same time was called Expo Kit. This is the one we're actually using. where they basically just give you all the source for that cloud builder that they have, and then you can run the cloud builder yourself. So you have Expo's full SDK. You don't have to install a bunch of extra native dependencies. You still get over-the-air updates, but you got to build it yourself. So you do have the native pain of building an Xcode and Android Studio. But you still have a lot more benefits than I think than plain React Native. The third workflow, this is just starting to come out. They call it Bear. So what they're doing now, they noticed with Expo Kit, they just didn't document how a lot of it worked, and everything was really tightly coupled, like all the Expo stuff mixed with the React Native stuff, and it got weird sometimes. I think I probably filled in a lot of the documentation for them. So with Bear, they're actually making the entire Expo SDK, all the extra stuff they add, completely modular. So you can just install a little bit or you can install a lot of it. And they're almost done. The only thing of consequence in my mind that they don't have yet is the OTA updates, which are admittedly huge, but they said they're going to do that in the next couple of releases. So I expect by the end of the year they'll have that. One thing that's so cool about it being modular is that you could use half the Expo SDK and you could use like Microsoft Code Push for the OTA updates. It's like it's that modular. You're no longer, as I put it, here we go. This was funny when they had a blog post announcing all this. Like I just found this one thing in there though. I was just reading their blog post, not expecting anything. I'm like, as Keith K, a longtime Expo developer and contributor put it, the future of Expo isn't I'm using Expo or not using Expo, but how much Expo do I want to use? I wasn't like trying to make some giant quote. I was answering a forum post that somebody was asking if they'd be totally screwed if they chose Expo Kit right now. And I was like, oh, cool. But that's the bottom line there is they're building this really sustainable thing that they want the whole React Native community to use part of, whatever part is suitable for them. And it'll just, in the future, it'll be like, hey, I'm using half the Expo SDK, but I'm using Microsoft Code Push for OTA updates, or I'm using this different library for my camera, and it's totally fine. Nothing weird breaks beyond whatever else would normally break weirdly. So our app, I said, is using, our Nudge Health app is using Expo Kit, and we're pretty happy with it. It's got some pretty crazy stuff. One of my favorite things to do was we had these SVG graphs, so we use React Native SVG to build these graphs that we actually then, with just like a small little compatibility shim, we use in React web code on our web product. So that was code sharing before they even had React Native Web. So a lot of fun. So trying to think if there was anything else to think of, but so yeah, that's about it. I mean, in terms of kind of meant to put something here like hey, what's not that pretty? Kind of just reiterating, hey, it's still, I think we're at version 0.60. It's iterating really fast, and I still have a long laundry list of things that work weird in Android that if I got 1 million hours to work on open source, I would probably try to take care of. But otherwise, I just pound my desk in frustration. But I would say the journey, it's been well worth any pains. I think it's actually more fun to be working with a technology that's growing as fast as it would, because I can guarantee you a bunch of these, the weird bugs you might see in React Native are actually the fault of things that haven't been working for 10 years in iOS and Android. So if I was working on native iOS code, besides the fact that I have to go write an Android app beside that, I would also be banging my head against bugs that I couldn't possibly fix because they're holding Apple's court. So I wholly recommend, unless you have a team of 50 people who can build both apps, I mean, React Native is a really good option for almost everybody. So that said, I do have some swag on the, it's not like swag, but I do have some Expo stickers. I asked for way too many stickers compared to the number of people who will listen to me talk about React Native for an hour. So you can feel free to go grab a sticker in the back as you're walking out. And I'll take any questions if anybody's got any. Cool. Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. So if there's one component you should avoid like the plague, at least in Android, anything that will ever show up in Android, it's the button component. It's the most counterintuitive thing ever because you think, I just want a button. I just want to use the button. The Android button, for whatever, like it looks like a legit iOS button, And then when it renders on Android, it looks like something out of Android 2009. Like, it probably looked old on gingerbread. So my recommendation is the touchable. So there's touchable opacity, touchable highlight, and touchable without feedback is styling your own on any sort of button, which really kind of jives. If you think of, say, like buttons inside like a table view, which is a lot of a context where you'll see it, it's actually probably not that far apart from the UI designer in iOS is just remembering back to that designing a button where I had to say this area is touchable, and it's really kind of up to me. So touchable, whatever, is definitely my recommendation. Button is weird, and everybody trips up on it at the start because it seems like it should be obvious. I haven't used touchable with native feedback yet, actually. I will tell you, touchable without feedback, I think, is the one where you can't stick anything other than a view inside of it. Like, it can't have a text as an immediate child. You always have to put the view inside of it. Whereas like touchable opacity doesn't have that issue. I haven't tried with native feedback before, though. I'm kind of interested in seeing what would happen to my app. Anybody else? I did have a question, John's question earlier about async storage. So I probably could show that to you real quick on the screen for anybody else's benefit. So async storage. I'm looking at the API because I don't remember half the API. React Native. So the question was just, how do you use async storage? So whatever storage is on the device itself. Although as we're talking, since you just want to do it off your web view, it might not be relevant to you anyway. But, oh, there we go, deprecated. So one trend going along with like what Expo is doing to make everything much more modular actually is they're moving a lot of stuff out of the base React Native library, and they're moving it into React Native community. So you'll see a lot of things like the camera APIs, async storage. It's a transition that's bound to be a little awkward. Like I just upgraded to the point where a lot of the old references were deprecated and suddenly, half my app's not working and I have to spend a few hours figuring it out. But in the long run, the benefit is really huge where you can have much smaller teams iterating on these things that have just kind of a considerable complexity. There's much more native to this than there is React. So you'll see a lot of these things kind of go out to React Native community like async storage, but it's got a real simple API where, assuming I do those installation steps correctly, I can import async storage. Let me go over to my inbox. Let's pretend I was just loading my inbox from async storage, if that makes any sense. And then I could just go like await async storage dot get. Forget what it's get item, I think. And then you can specify, some kind of key, presuming you already stored it. And it would just return null if it wasn't there. And then likewise, await, like if you wanted the await, I'm not gonna type the whole thing out, but you could do .set item, and then you could pass the key as the first value, and then the value as the second value, and it can store any kind of JSON. Obviously, if it's like stuff like dates and stuff like that, you'll want to do probably like stringify. Actually, you want to do stringify in general. You're gonna want to stringify everything. What's really nice compared to like if you're doing that on both native apps or you're doing it with some more primitive API is that storage mechanism is going to work pretty differently on iOS and Android. Like I think they're actually using SQLite behind the scenes in Android. They're using something completely different. Probably not NS defaults. Probably something else. I can't remember what they're using on iOS, but to have an API that just to say stuff some JSON here, much easier. And then the secure store is an Expo API that exposes keychain and some kind of weird encrypted thing on Android that I don't know the name of that ends up, you can store passwords. If you have an app that still stores passwords, it probably isn't a great idea anyway at this point, but let that stand. Keys, things like that, API keys and stuff like that. Anybody else? Awesome. Well, thank you very much. It was great presenting here. I always like talking about React Native. Anybody's got any questions now or later, always email me or ask me at the end here. And likewise, that presentation and code repository are online that you guys can download it and see how it works yourself. Thanks.
Cool. Well, that's all we had planned for the night. There might be some more pizza if you want to grab some or steal a box on your way home. Just the food that's here, nothing else that's in a box that belongs to University Tees. Thank you very much again to our hosts. And again, where you're looking for content or even ideas. So if anybody has anything that they're kind of thinking about, you can come up and say hi to me if you would like, or Zach, because we're going to bother him until he leaves our beautiful state. But otherwise, thank you very much and have a good night. Yep. Sorry, one person has a question. Sorry. So are you going to give a talk? Well, then how am I supposed to know what next month's content is? All right, thank you very much. Have a good night.